So, welcome everyone this week to All Things Food or Gardens and Grub, where we talk about a different fruit or vegetable every week to introduce you to maybe some things you haven't tried before and maybe some things that you've had before, but we talk about some of the global uses of the food, the nutrition of the food, the gardening schedule of the food. And today I'm excited to introduce you to an often forgotten about vegetable. But before we get to that, if you'd like to ask a question, you can either raise your hand or you can put a question in the chat box or communicate through Facebook. So what I have for you today is the parsnip. So this is a really often forgotten about vegetable and unappreciated, which is sort of curious because this was such an often consumed vegetable in our past. It is related to carrots and related to parsley and Queen Anne's lace. This is a delicious vegetable. It was actually cultivated first in Eurasia, which is basically the conglomeration of continents of Europe and Asia. So this has been cultivated and consumed since antiquity. So Greeks and Romans consumed this vegetable. And it's very, very easy to grow, especially here. So anywhere where there's frost, this is a great place to grow it. A place with 4 seasons. A lot of things that we've introduced you to on this little show before have been a lot of tropicals, a lot of tropical fruits and things like that. This is something that root crops are really great to grow where there's places where there's 4 seasons. The reason that this was so popular, besides the fact that it was easy to grow, the reason it was so popular is as a source of sugar over the winter. So the taste of this, if you go ahead and slice a little piece of it, you can eat it raw or cook it, and we'll talk about how to cook it later on, but it's very sweet. It's sweeter than a carrot, but it's also very nutty and earthy. So it's pretty tasty raw, but it has a sort of bitterness to it that you can actually cure with some cooking. When you cook this, anytime you heat a starch, it's usually going to break the long starch molecules down into shorter sugar molecules, and it becomes sweeter when you roast it. So if you're ever doing a roast, and most often people will do mirepoix, which is 2 parts onion, 1 part celery, and 1 part carrots, you should really go ahead and throw in some parsnips because it's like an extremely deeply flavored carrot. And it's wonderful. These tend to be more expensive because people don't grow them or request them as much. You'll see, 20 different, varieties and sizes of carrots that you can get, multicolored, organic, the ones cut into little bullets, grated, sliced. You'll get long carrots, little short carrots, but there's only one kind of parsnip, and they're not even in every grocery store. If you go to kind of your more chichi fon specialty grocery stores, they're usually going to be like by the herbs, usually on the top shelf in a little basket. So keep an eye out for them. I highly recommend them if you're going to do a roast. A lot of times you can kind of make a rack of vegetables underneath a chicken that you can roast. And this is a wonderful vegetable to put in there. So this was a source of sugar in antiquity, in the Greek and Roman times. If you can imagine, sugar back then, before they started bringing sugar over from basically India along the Spice Road, granulated sugar, it actually came in a loaf, and it did not actually get to Europe until about 1099 AD. But it had been cultivated in tropical areas on islands in Southeast Asia for a very long time before it made it to India. And even then, when it got to Europe, they considered it a medicine because it was so expensive and so hard to get. So if you can imagine, the only time that you would taste sugar really was you would get sugar in the summertime through fruits. And then also, if you wanted like a pure sugar, the only way to get it in the old world meaning Europe and Asia, Eurasia, The only way you could get is if you wanted to get through a bunch of stinging insects in the form of honey. So that like intense sweetness, you could only get it during the summer or preserve it for the winter. But during the winter, there wasn't a lot of sweetness, except for a parsnip. You could take a parsnip, grate it, and cook it into cakes and cookies and things like that. And it was a source of sweetness that you could actually leave in the ground over the winter. They get sweeter with a frost, and then you could pull it up and then actually have something sweet to enjoy over the summer. Over the winter time. So human beings are designed to taste sweetness. It's one of our 5 tastes, and on the tip of our tongue is where we have our sweet taste buds. We are trained for it from the time we're babies, where all of us can digest lactose for the first couple of years of our life for mother's milk. Children are so sensitive to sweetness, looking for sugar in mother's milk, that they actually even have sweet taste buds sometimes on the inside of their cheeks. So we are trained to want sugar and to look for sugar and to desire sweetness. It gives us a serotonin biocascade in our brain when we eat sugar, which is why it can be addictive. But if you could imagine that the only sugar that you could ever get was only in the summertime, or if you could get honey, which was very expensive and hard to get because of the danger inherent in getting into a beehive to get it, that you would think that this would be a really lovely thing. So it still is a lovely thing, but now sugar is so widely available that this sort of fell out of favor as a source of sugar over the winter time because you can get sugar everywhere. So some ways to cook this are you can chop it up and do a roast. You can put meat, over it and roast it, or you can just roast this on a sheet pan with some oil, the way that you would do regular fruits and vegetables, like, regular roasted vegetables like your potatoes and carrots and things like that. You could cook this the exact same way. This is great for diabetics, people that have to reduce the amount of sugar that they're eating. You can do, rather than doing potatoes, there's a lot of nutritionists, dietitians that recommend that people that are pre-diabetic or diabetic stop eating potatoes, like floury type things, to reduce those in their diet. And so this is a great substitute because it's sweet, but it doesn't have that many calories. This whole thing probably has 75 calories in it. So maybe 75 to 100, depending on the size of a parsnip. And it's very rich in fiber. Fiber, as we've talked about previously, is great for lowering our blood cholesterol and also taking up room in your digestive system without providing calories. So that gives you a feeling of fullness without having calories. Plus, because fibers are prebiotic, our probiotics are a little flora that live in our gut. Fibers feed those and actually give us great health. So when you feed the good bacteria in your gut, it protects you in so many ways by the byproducts of your gut flora. If you're eating a lot of fiber, will actually protect you from certain cancers. Whereas if you don't eat enough fiber and you eat a lot of nitrites and things like that, the byproducts of feeding your flora, those kinds of foods can actually cause certain kinds of cancers, especially colon cancer. So this is a great thing to add to your diet to substitute for some of those more floury vegetables. If you are going to process this to eat, I recommend for cooking it to keep the skin on. Just give it a good scrub with a brush and some water when you bring it home. Anything that contacts the soil, like a beet or a carrot or a parsnip, a root crop, is going to absorb minerals through the skin. And most of the vitamins and minerals are actually just on the inside of the skin. And this goes for potatoes, onions. Onions are a little bit different because you take the peel off the outside. That's a whole other class of vegetables. We could do that on a different week because that's a real diverse and fun one. But anyway, root vegetables, I wouldn't peel this if you're going to roast it because you're going to get much more of the nutritional quality out of it if you roast it with the peel on. If you eat it raw, you're going to get more of the vitamin C out of it. Mostly when you cook things, sometimes the vitamin C starts to break down a little bit, but that's okay. You can absolutely eat this cooked, and it a lot of times is a lot more digestible for some people because this is a very fibrous vegetable. So if you cook it, it softens the fibers and makes them more digestible, sweeter, and more delicious. You can also make fries out of this, especially if you have like a baking sheet with a rack on top of it. You can coat these and you can cut them into fries and leave the peel on, but cut them into fries, little sticks. And then you can coat them in a little bit of oil, maybe some garlic salt, pepper, anything that you would like for flavoring, curry powder if you have that sort of palate, and then cook these on the rack. If you have a convection oven, that's even better because convection dries things, and you really want to form like a nice crust on the outside of this, and that only happens, things only get brown in the absence of moisture. It's called a Maillard reaction. But the way that you would cut that for this is you would go ahead and do a couple of pieces that are about equal in length, and then cut them, I would cut them pretty thin because then they have the ability to kind of dry out a little bit in the oven so that they're not, so they don't get real soft. They actually stay kind of crisp and delicious. So that's how I would make fries out of them. Kids will actually love this, just don't tell them what it is. And you know, 'cause kids can sometimes be picky. I would also, if you're feeding kids, give them this food first when they're hungry. Serve the fries first and then the nuggets or whatever you're gonna serve with it. And kids will love this. They'll taste it and go, because it looks like a potato, but it'll at least be surprising because it'll taste like a very sweet roasted carrot. Yeah, very, very delicious. So, oh, what else do I want to tell you about this? Oh yeah, okay, so planting them is really easy here in the Piedmont of North Carolina. So the time to plant these is either between August 15th and September 15th, and what that will do is cause them to sprout greenery on the top. It will start to put the taproot down into the ground and you'll get this big frond of greenery. Once the winter hits, they'll start to spread out sort of across the ground, and then they'll overwinter, so they'll grow very slowly through the winter time, and then you can start harvesting them in January and February. You just walk outside, the foliage will be growing very close to the ground, and you just pull them out and they'll be sweet and delicious. They'll be gorgeous because they've been really cold. They'll grow really slowly over the winter time. They're usually ready to harvest between 100 and 130 days. So usually it takes about 130 days if you overwinter them. But then you can also plant them in April. Again, you can plant seeds and you'll get a harvest in the fall. So they'll grow through the summer and then you'll get a harvest in the fall. So I recommend planting these. They're very easy to grow. When you get the seeds, go ahead and try to use all the seeds that first year, because carrot seeds, parsley seeds, and parsnip seeds, they're all in the same family, Apiaceae, and they don't hold well year after year. Whereas like a beet seed or a chard seed or a spinach seed, those tend to last a little better, year after year. If you can keep them refrigerated and out of the light and moisture, you can kind of preserve them for a little bit longer. But parsnip seeds really don't last. So try to use up the fresh seed that you get. Now, if you find some old seeds, go ahead and plant them anyway, but maybe you will only get like half of them to come up. So I wanted to talk to you about the life cycle of this plant, because everything in that family, the carrots, parsley, and parsnips, are biennials. So the vocabulary of the day is biennial. So we know an annual, like lettuce or spinach, what it'll do is it will grow leaves, and then it will put off seeds and die all in 1 year. A biennial, it takes 2 years. So things that fall in this category are beets, chard, parsnips, carrots. There's a lot of things that do. Sweet William, which is a flower. And then there's a perennial, which is like, a perennial would be like an oak tree. It grows for more than 2 years. An oak tree can last 100 or more years. A saguaro cactus can grow for 200 plus years. Let's see, like a sage or any of those Mediterranean herbs, sage, lavender, any of those, rosemary, those can grow for decades. They just keep kind of coming back in the same place. So those are the difference between them, but I wanted to talk about this because if you're trying to, and right now because of COVID, there's a seed shortage. There will be a lot of varieties available next year, but maybe not all that you're looking for. So usually what I do anyway is let some of my stuff go to seed. So if you just let one of these guys go to seed, you'll have plenty of seeds, and then you can just pull them straight off and stick them right in the ground, and they'll come back up where they're at, or you can move them to a different space in the garden. You only really need to save one, because the second year, one of these plants will get huge, like really big and crazy. And so you really only need to leave one. You can harvest the rest, and then just leave one to go to seed, and then you can just plant them immediately, and they'll come up when it's time for them to come up. So that's about all I wanted to say about the parsnip. Does anybody have any questions?
So we had a first question, which I went ahead and posted in the chat and in the Q&A about seeing your past episodes. And so I said that those were available on YouTube, but I thought maybe you wanted to give a little overview about what folks have missed to entice them to go to the YouTube page.
Okay. Oh my gosh, so many fun things. If you're curious about anything tropical, there's all kinds of tropical things on there. For a while there, I was providing some tasting samples to a school, a sort of a farming school called Seeds here in Durham. And so the kids were tasting along. So I did a lot of tropical fruits to start because that's very tasty for kids. So we did lychee, tamarind, papaya. What am I forgetting? Oh my gosh, we did so many things. We did a jicama. Chayote, I think, was the first week. That was really fun. What am I forgetting? I've just done so many things. I really like the lychee week because it was the lychee rambutan longan family is like really exciting for me. Oh, we did bananas. If you're not going to watch any other video, you should definitely see the banana video, because the banana that you know and love that you can buy in the grocery store for 39 to 59 cents a pound is going extinct, and you should know about it. So that's a really important one, I think, just for you to kind of appreciate the readily available, amazing food system that we have, especially here in America, but globally. The fact that we can get sort of strawberries in February, like how is that possible when they don't grow anywhere around here in February? And it's because of our global food system. And so the banana week, I think, is informative, it's educational, entertaining, but it's also, I would say, kind of puts you on point to appreciate the sort of easy, cheap food that we have, generally speaking, in the US. So check it out.
I love it. I love the promotion. Thank you, Sherlyn. All right, so moving back into our questions about the food, I'm going to say, sorry, I have to put my glasses on so I can read what people have written. So the first question is, how much space does it take to grow one of these plants?
Oh, okay, great question. So normally you're gonna plant them just a few inches apart and then water them really well if it doesn't rain. Every time that you plant seeds, go ahead and water. Even if it's supposed to rain that day, here in Durham, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes, it'll change, that kind of deal. The way that I guarantee that it's gonna rain when I plant things is I always water, and then it'll definitely rain. Anyway, you're gonna plant them 2 to 3 inches apart, and then when they get about 5 inches high a few weeks later, you're gonna go ahead and thin them out to about like 4 to 5 inches apart. And then that's gonna give you this nice big root where they're not competing with each other. If you want to maximize the space, because this crop takes so long, what you can do is plant these babies and then go ahead and plant a crop of radish all among these, because a radish takes 30 days. And this guy takes 100 to 130 days. So you can intermix these with radishes and get a crop of radish in between, and then wait for these guys to get a little bit bigger. So, I highly recommend intercropping that way so that you can make the most of the land that you have. But basically, if you give like 4 or 5 inches of room for these guys, you're gonna get some pretty good ones. And, you want to make sure to do probably 10 inches between the rows if you want to do rows. I tend to like to plant on a grid because I feel like it uses my small space a little bit better. So if you did these all 5 inches apart, 6 inches apart, and then you're going to get some pretty good ones. And then they're going to mature at different times. So the way that you see that these are ready, because you see this beautiful foliage on it, just go down to the dirt and move the dirt out of the way. And when it's a good size, go ahead and grab the foliage real good and boop, pop it out. When you plant these, you want to make sure that your ground is free of rocks, because if you've got rocks, it'll grow in, like, sometimes you see like legs grow on it. It'll grow around a rock and then you'll pull it out and it'll break off. So just be mindful of that. Also, if you're harvesting these on a sunny day and you've got a ton of them, be really careful, because when you harvest them, sometimes people are very sensitive to the foliage on these. Now, you're not going to be out there harvesting rows and rows and rows of these on a really sunny day. You're probably going to pull 2 or 3 of them and then walk right back into your house and wash your hands and wash this, and you're fine. But if you harvest a bunch of these, rub the foliage all over your hands, and then you're exposed to the sun for a long time, sometimes you can get a rash. It can be phototoxic. But just wash your hands, you'll be fine. Usually when they warn people about the phototoxicity of parsnip foliage, it's usually like people who are harvesting, so they wear gloves. But just be mindful. If you have really sensitive skin, throw on a pair of gloves and then wash your hands when you go inside.
Wow, that is interesting. Are there other plants that also cause that phototoxicity? Another vocabulary word today?
Yeah, the skin of oranges, the skin of all citrus. Don't take an unscented and put orange essential oil in it and rub it all over your skin, because anything that's fine if you wanted to like make a soap and put orange essential oil in it, because you wash that off. But people who, that's a phototoxic issue. People, you'll peel an orange while you're outside, and some people have really sensitive skin. It can cause like a sunburn or a rash. So, don't under any, circumstances like take straight essential oils of any kind and put them directly on your skin. You always want to dilute them with something. But definitely with the citrus essential oils, not citrus fragrances, but citrus essential oils, don't apply them directly to your skin, because on a hot sunny day, it'll be itchy. And now some people have skin of steel and it doesn't bother them, but there are a lot of people with sensitive skin and it can cause a painful rash.
Wow.
Great question.
We always learn things from you that we don't expect.
People always ask me things for me to go into the Rolodex of my brain and remember stuff.
Okay, well, I will return back to the audience's question. Sorry, audience. The next one is, are deer attracted to these in the garden?
They probably would be, because they are, it's greenery, and deer, even like, there are no deer-proof plants except for maybe cacti. A mature cacti would probably avoid. Sometimes they avoid holly. Anything that's pokey, they'll avoid. But for a parsnip, anything with a beautiful greenery on it, they're probably going to nibble on it. If it's overwintering and they end up like eating it to the ground, it'll be fine, because in the spring it'll come back up. But if you've got a deer issue, they're probably going to be knocking out all your lettuces and things anyway. So a fence is about the only thing you can do for deer, unfortunately. Deer are like us. They like variety. So even though there's tons of stuff to eat in the forest, they're curious and they want to try different things. And believe me, a sweet, delicious, gorgeous lettuce or a carrot green or something like that is going to be, I would think, probably much more delicious than always nibbling on oak leaves or grasses or whatever's available. So especially in the wintertime when there's a lot less to eat and you've got this like prostate foliage growing along the ground, and it's bright green and gorgeous, they're probably going to go for it.
Oh, those deer. The next question is about preservation of parsnips. Can you preserve parsnips like by canning them?
I think you can. you know, I'll have to always look at the National Center for Home Food Preservation. I've never preserved parsnips because I grow them and then I just cook them. But if you're gonna do any preservation, always follow a recipe from National Center for Home Food Preservation or other extension sites that are current, not ones that are, you know, 20, 30, 40 years old, because the National Center for Home Food Preservation is actually a department at the USDA, and they're constantly testing recipes. So if you have a recipe that is, you know, your grandma's recipe, you know, that's 30, 40, 50 years ago, and you've, you know, pulled it out and you want to follow that recipe, that's fine as long as you compare it to the National Center for Home Food Preservation and contact your extension agent to make sure that the pH is the same. So, you know, some people will tell you don't do anything that's not on National Center for Home Food Preservation, which is true, but you can, you know, if you have somebody that understands and, you know, teaches canning, they can look at the recipe and see if it compares and the pH would be the same. But that's only from a very experienced person. If you're in doubt, you can always take it to a lab and have them test the pH. That's not usually that expensive to do, and there are labs that do it here in North Carolina. I mean, that's how people develop new recipes for sale. And just be really careful about canned goods that people give you. Don't just trust any canned good that people give you. Make sure to learn how to do it right. And consult the National Center for Home Food Preservation if possible. You know, watch canning demonstrations from an extension agent that's within the last few years. Always be keeping up on you know, current research surrounding preserving food, because it's just not worth canning something and then giving it to everyone and making people sick, because it can be extremely dangerous. It isn't just you know, your stomach is upset for a day. Like, especially with low acid foods, you can actually kill people. So be really, really careful. Canning is a great activity and it's wonderful and I highly recommend it, but just make sure that you're following National Center for Home Food Preservation or get your recipe tested. Those are the only two ways that you would really want to do that. But check it out. I've never actually preserved these, but I'm sure that there's some sort of pickle you can do with them. Or freezing is really good. You could mash and freeze these. Another great thing to do is make chips out of these. It requires frying, which is not always the best. It's a sometimes food, but you could easily fry these and then, you know, store them. It wouldn't be like for months, but if, you know, anything fried, you're pretty much going to eat pretty quickly, but it's like a bag of chips. How else could you do it? Yeah, I would say probably freezing. You could probably dry them. But yeah, those are the multiple ways that I would do it.
So I just have to put a plug in. If anybody does end up pickling some parsnip and they know how to do it safely, I'll take it. Just. So we have time for one more question. Does anyone in the audience want to unmute themselves and ask a question before we close? Be brave. Be brave. You can do it. We do have a comment that fried sounds really good.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not big on, you know, I'm not big on frying things, but just because fried food is so easy to get here, especially in the southern United States. But Michael Pollan said, you're welcome to eat any food that you like as long as you make it yourself. Like if you had to fry every chicken or fry every thing that you were ever going to eat that you wanted fried, it makes such a mess and is so much trouble that you wouldn't do it very often. So it's a sometimes food, fried parsnips, but.
Awesome. Well, I guess we have no brave audience members who want to speak. Hopefully next week they'll get their hope. They'll get their comment.
Pop up for a second that the coconut was the second favorite one. I forgot we did the coconut just because every week it's something new, and like I'm spinning so many plates, I can't remember all the things because I think about food all the time. So the coconut was really fun. I made an awesome coconut chutney out of the ones that I broke here. So it was awesome. Yeah, really
awesome. Well, I look forward to what you'll talk about next week.
Yes, and if there's anything that you would like to see, please let us know. I would be glad to, because there's just so much food out there to enjoy. But otherwise, I'll just keep hitting the produce departments to see what looks good.
Great. Thanks, Sherilyn.
See you next week, everybody.